Good morning, friends. I hope you're doing well today on this Friday morning. It's not quite as cold today as it was yesterday here in Houston. They say it will be in the mid 60s, I think. So we're getting used to the cold. I object to winter. I usually don't wear a coat until it gets into the 40s, but I know some of you Minnesotans wear coats most of the year, and we just don't understand that down here in sunny Houston, and even further south where I grew up on the Rio Grande River, McAllen, Texas. That's where I graduated from high school, barely, and it's good to have you with us today. I'm going to hope to share some things with you today that'll benefit you and bless you and give you some encouragement. And I'm doing this in place of Alice. Alice is generally speaking well, but she's got a sore throat today, and so I volunteered to fill in. And we are grateful for your friendship. We're grateful for your prayer and for your support and for opportunities to minister like this, even in your church or in your city, someplace else other than from Alice's office here. But we're grateful for our friendship with you. So I'll just begin, and others can catch this in the recording, I'm sure, if they like. Each of us preachers usually have favorite messages that we deliver. Most of us have one funeral message and one wedding message. Sometimes we have additional ones, and we tweak them from time to time to make them a little more appropriate and a little better, we hope. But there are other messages like the plan of salvation. We might have different versions of that message, and so, but there's probably, I suppose, just ministers would recognize it, but there's a term for those favorite messages. One of them is sugar sticks. That's a preacher might say to another, I'm going to preach one of my sugar sticks tonight. What he means is it's a message that means a lot to him, and he feels like it's part of his life message to others, and he wants to share it. And so he shares it multiple times. In fact, Alice and I had a friend, a very famous friend back in the 70s. His name was Dr. R.G. Lee. And Dr. Lee was the pastor of, I'm trying to remember for sure, Belmont Baptist Church, where Adrian Rogers followed him in that church. Dr. Lee, I think, started that church and was pastor like 50 years, and then Adrian Rogers followed him. And we were blessed to know them both and to fellowship with them and to learn from them. But Dr. Lee had a sermon called Payday Someday. And it was a famous sermon that he preached. It was his sugar stick. In fact, it was recorded that he preached it over 1,200 times, and it was recorded. We have the album. We also have a book that he wrote, A Place Called Heaven, and I've got a fun story about that, but I'll skip that for now and stick with Dr. R.G. Lee. He was the old-fashioned preacher, and we were blessed to be his friends and have been blessed to be in his home and to be with him right before he left for heaven. And but the Payday Someday was a very famous sermon, and people always enjoyed listening to it, and churches would have him come just to preach that one sermon because they wanted to hear the masterful way he preached it and the conviction that it brought when he preached it. And maybe a quick summary of the sermon would be this. You can get away with sin for a while, but there's a payday someday. And so it was profound. And so getting back to these favorite messages, I was at a convention in New Orleans. I think it was in '68. And there was about 3,000 to 5,000 pastors in this room for a pastor's conference. and evangelists as well. And the speaker was a seminary professor. I never knew his name. I'm not even familiar with which seminary he was from, but I never forgot what he said. And I have preached it many times, in many ways, in different places. And I'll just share with you the essence of it this morning. He said, when he came out, he said, pastors, you'll want to get a pencil and paper, because you're going to want to preach this sermon next Sunday, which was kind of a profound thought, I thought. Most of us are not that sure about our sermons, how they're going to be received, but he said this was one that we would all want to preach the next Sunday, and I did, and I'm sure many of them did, because it was so profound. And I've had to change the title because he didn't give us a title, but I found a title in the story. And the story is about Joseph in the Old Testament. And my title that I adopted was, I can tell you, if I look at these notes right quick, my title for the message was, See That You Fall Not Out by the Way. And I thought that's interesting in terms of our conversational language today. By the way, see that you fall not out. We would say, see that you don't fall out. And if you'll recall, that's when Joseph, and we'll get there in a minute, but that's when Joseph is sending his brothers to get their father and their families and bring them to Egypt because of the horrible conditions where their families were. And we'll share more about that in a moment. But he told them, I'm going to give you this, take all this stuff with you and go get your parents, and don't fall out by the way. Well, I thought about that several different ways. One way is they could fall out by the way simply because of the dangers in making the trip. You know that when you travel anywhere in those days without security, you're traveling with donkeys and by foot in many cases, maybe most cases. They've got wagons full of precious things that could be stolen from them. And so he told them, don't fall out by the way. It's important that you make this trip. So stick in there, defend yourselves, get this assignment complete. Don't fall out by the way. And the other thing is, they were brothers. And I have two amazing brothers, two younger brothers. But both of them are remarkable men. But growing up, it's easy to see how brothers can have a falling out. I don't think we ever did, but I've seen it so many times that in families we have falling out. So maybe that's what he was talking about. Don't get irritated with each other. Get this job done. So let's take a look at Joseph's life right quick, and we'll see what was going on. I'm trying to arrange these memory points. The life of Joseph is interesting, and we're just going to run through it quickly. There's no reason to turn there because most of you know it, and if you don't, you can take notes from what I'm sharing and look it up. And but he was Joseph was Jacob's favorite son. You remember the coat of many colors that his daddy made for him? And so he was his daddy's favorite son. And that made his brothers jealous. And you'll recall, number two, he had dreams. And in his dreams, he saw his brothers bowing down to him, which further angered his brothers. Jealousy in families can rise up quickly, but especially if your little brother's telling you that you're going to worship him someday, you're going to bow down to him. That'll irritate an older brother. And they knew that he was Daddy's favorite, and it irritated them to the point, out of jealousy, that they sold him into slavery, and he was taken into Egypt. That's in Genesis 37, by the way. So they threw him in a pit, sold him to an Egyptian trader, and he took him home to Egypt. And he may have been sold multiple times until he got to Potiphar's house. But he arrived at Potiphar's house, who was an an Egyptian official, a government official, where he rose to quite a position of trust. Joseph not only was greatly loved by his father, but he tended to have easily gotten the respect of others, perhaps by his personality, his winning personality, perhaps by his positive nature, or perhaps by his gifts, because one of his gifts was interpreting dreams. And so he was, at some point, he became over all of Potiphar's house. He was widely trusted by Potiphar. That's in chapter 39 of Genesis. And then there's the temptation and the integrity. And if you recall, Potiphar's wife falsely accused Joseph because he didn't submit to her temptation. She tried to seduce him, and he didn't fall for it. And because of that, he was accused by her of adultery and of sexually molesting her or whatever, which reminds me of an experience I had when I was probably his age. I was a young evangelist, I guess, mid-20s, and out of the Navy and into evangelism. And I'm about to sing. I played the guitar and sang back then and made albums. I'm about to sing in a city auditorium that sat several thousand people. And I won't be more specific than that, but some very famous people were on the program, and I was, it's kind of like my kids' schoolwork. What does not belong in this picture? Well, it was me. I didn't belong in the picture. Everybody else on the program, on the stage, was quite famous. And so I was pleased to be there, of course, but I was, quote, a nobody. And I'm in the hotel lobby when a lady showed up, very finely dressed. You could tell she was wealthy, and she's trying to check into the hotel. She finally got that done, and she's standing there with her luggage. And remember, this is a big event, so a lot of people are coming through with their luggage, and all the hotel handlers are, whatever you would call them, are handling the luggage and getting them to the rooms and that sort of thing. And I'm a young man. I'm standing there, and obviously I can do things that an older person can't do, and perhaps a wealthy lady can't do. And so the person that was my boss at the moment, he's the one that secured that opportunity for me. He said, "Would you take her bags up to her room for her?" And being the kind, gracious young man that I was, I said, "Well, certainly." So I took her bags up to her room and set them down outside of room 105 or whatever it might have been. And she came up and she said, very seductively, "Oh, would you take those into my room and put one on the bed and put this one on the stand for the luggage stand?" And I said, "Ma'am, I'd rather leave it here, and you can pull it into your room, I'm sure." And she said, "Oh, please." And I knew better, which is clear. I knew better than to do that for her. But because you're kind of mixed between caring about her need and defending and protecting your reputation. So what move do you make? So I grabbed the bags. The door was wide open. I grabbed the bags and I rushed them into the room, put one on the bed, and by the time I got the other bag sat down, I heard the door slam and looked over at her, and she was unbuttoning her blouse. And I was stunned. I just made my way quickly past her, got to the door, and got out of the room. And that's the closest that I've had to falling into a circumstance and situation like that. But it can happen in a hurry. And that's why we pastors, we wise pastors, when we counsel with a woman, for instance, at our churches, we never do it on a day off when we're the only ones there. We always have staff close by. We always, or we should always, leave our door ajar so that we can't be accused of something. It's quite easily to trap a pastor if anybody desires to do that, and sadly some do at times. So How did I get there? I'm not sure. Well, yeah, Joseph is being accused of that sort of thing by Potiphar's wife, and Potiphar sees that he's thrown into prison. So the guy who was number one in his care of his family and his home and all that is now in prison over a false accusation. And you know, we in ministry, we get false accusations. Well, we get real accusations too. It's not that we're always innocent, it's that we are often innocent. And I've had those kinds of things before, criticisms that people have, and sometimes you just have to sit down and get into a counseling situation with someone in charge and let them work through the details and set you up in such a way that people can understand where truth lies. And so that's not been a big thing in my life, thankfully, but it is a big thing in some people's lives. There's some major ministries right now that are dealing with accusations, and anything can happen in ministry. I just published a book for a Liberian pastor named Pay Bagnon, and his book is called Grief in the Pulpit. It's an amazing book. Every pastor should read it because it's 387 pages, I think, about ways that pastors can be grieved in serving the Lord. And it's on Amazon. Grief in the Pulpit by Pay, that's P-A-Y-E, Bagnon or Bagnon, B-A-G-N-O-N. And I would encourage you to look it over. I think there's even an audiobook version of it there. But Joseph was accused and ended up in prison. And you remember in his prison term that he was given some dreams to interpret, and he did. And eventually he interpreted one for Pharaoh that he could not get interpreted by anyone. And he ended up being released from prison. Pharaoh took him into his own home, and as Potiphar did, because they saw the same things in Joseph's life, Pharaoh put him over everything he had except his own life. He was second in command over Egypt. And we're getting to our point, so hang on there. He is now in Pharaoh's palace and second in command over the nation. And a famine came. You remember that. This is chapter 42. A famine came, and his brothers came to Egypt for food, and they didn't recognize him. It's interesting that it says in the King James Version, at least, which is the one that I always preached out of, in the King James Version, it says that they heard him. Well, it had to do with eavesdropping, and I forget the exact terms of it, but the point is they didn't recognize him. Oh, I know what it was. He spoke, in the King James it says he spoke gruffly to them. He recognized that they don't recognize me. They haven't seen me since I was a young teenager. And they don't know who I am. And he spoke gruffly. He disguised his voice. And so they still didn't know who he was, although he's getting help for them. And at some point, he closes the door, invites them into the room, and the Egyptians there in the palace could actually hear probably through the keyhole in the door. They heard him disclosing himself to his brothers, and I am your brother. And so they have been reunited. And in chapter 46, he sends them home to get his daddy and their families, because remember, there's a famine and they need stuff. And in chapter 45, is where he actually gets their forgiveness. He confesses to them that he's been tricking them. Chapter 45, okay. Then in chapter 45, verse 24, it says he sent his brothers, and as they were leaving, he said to them, "Don't quarrel along the way, or don't fall out by the way. The wagons, you see, my message title, as I said at the beginning, was Don't Fall Out by the Way. But when I continued from here, I came to a different title. So that's no longer the title of what I'm telling you. The new title is What's in Your Wagon? You see, we learn that Pharaoh instructed his people to give them wagons filled with gold and silver and food and all kinds of things that they could need. He gave them provisions for the journey. To each of them he gave new clothing. To Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 sets of clothes. And this is what he sent to his father: 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread and other provisions for his journey. And so this is not a small deal. This is a big deal. These wagons are an important consideration because, as you'll see now, they went out of Egypt and came to where their father Jacob was in the land of Canaan, and they told him a message. Joseph gave them a message, 3 points. His 3 points were: tell Daddy that I'm alive, tell Daddy that I have forgiven you, and tell Daddy that I have prepared a place for you. Now here's the point. The world around you, the people you work with, the people across the street, these people that we are around that are interacting with our lives, they need the same message that Jacob told his sons to go give their brothers. So let's look at it. They were to tell Daddy, Joseph, who you said you would grieve until you die, Daddy is not dead. He is alive. We're to tell people that Jesus, our elder brother, is not dead. He's alive. Number 2, they were to tell Daddy, Joseph, our brother, has forgiven us for selling him into slavery and the mean things we did to him and mistreating him because of his dreams. We're to tell people, Jesus, our elder brother, is not only alive, he's forgiven us for all those things that we did. And then they were to tell Daddy, Joseph has prepared a place for us. And we are to tell people, Jesus, our elder brother, has prepared a place for us. Now here's where it gets sticky. It says, when they told him everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw their cart, verse 26, it says, they told him Joseph is still alive. In fact, he's the ruler over all of Egypt. Jacob was stunned. Joseph's daddy, Jacob, was stunned. He didn't believe them. Don't be surprised when you share the message that Jesus is alive, he's forgiven us, and he's preparing a place. Don't be surprised if people don't necessarily respond positively to that. You see, we're witnesses. We're not soul winners. I know we use that term sometimes. That's not us. We're witnesses. The Holy Spirit is the soul winner. He convicts the world of sin, righteousness, and judgment. He's the one that testifies, for Jesus said, he will testify of me. I feel concerned for Christians who are so focused on the Holy Spirit that he becomes central to them, when Jesus said, what is central to the Holy Spirit is me. He will testify me, and you shall be my witnesses. So we need to put Jesus in the place that he is and understand that the Holy Spirit is an important part of the Trinity, and he has an obligation and responsibility that he fulfills. But understand, when we share Christ with people and his salvation and the cross and the resurrection and our forgiveness and our eternal life, when we share that with people, they don't always respond positively. And we need to learn how to graciously share those things when we do, and how to be prepared for the fact that they may not. Back when I worked on Sunset Strip with Arthur Blessed in the 1960s, we would give gospel tracts out. In fact, we both had leather pouches on our belts, and we had 200 or 300 gospel tracts in those, and we would go out on Sunset Strip and pass those gospel tracts out at night and witness to people, to the hippies, which was most of what was there, to Hollywood personalities. We witnessed to motorcycle gang members, and I could share some interesting stories about that. We witnessed in topless clubs and all over Hollywood, and even had a service at Gazzari's nightclub every Friday night. Arthur would preach, and I would sing and play the guitar, and Andre Crouch and the Disciples would also perform in those gospel rallies, and even outside on Sunset Strip, on the sign in front of Gazzari's nightclub, it would say Friday night gospel rally. So it was no secret, and we had some interesting experiences there, of course. And but Daddy didn't believe them. It says clearly they told him, and he didn't believe them. That's verse 26. But in verse 27, something happens. When they told him everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, and the spirit of their father Jacob was revived. And Israel said, Jacob, I am convinced my son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. You see, it wasn't their message that saved Jacob. It was what was in their wagon. So I know that you share Christ, and I know sometimes you're disappointed when people don't respond as you would like to see them respond, for their sake, of course. But the question is, what's in your wagon? There's a town close to Houston, where I live, and back... Wow, this would have been in the late 60s, maybe early 70s, 70 or 71. I did a revival meeting there, a youth revival, of course. I was a youth, and I did a youth revival. We had over 100 teenagers born again in that revival, but one afternoon I needed something, and someone told me that I should ask a deacon in the church for it, and they told me where he worked. He had his own business, and so I drove across town and walked in, and the receptionist said, can I help you? And I said, yes, I'm here to see Daryl. And she said, and what's your name? And I told her, and can I tell him what it's about? And I said, well, yeah, I've got a need pertaining to the church and the revival, and because he's one of the deacons at the church, I wanted to get his perception on it. And she had the strangest look on her face, and she said, I'm sorry, Eddie, did you suggest Daryl was a deacon at the church? And I said, yes, ma'am. She said, well, I never would have suspected that. And I realized that Daryl didn't have much in his wagon. You see, you can have the right message, but if your life doesn't show it to be true, then you're a failure. So the question today is not, don't fall out by the way. That was the old title. The question today is, what's in your wagon? What do people encounter when they encounter you? What's their perception? How does who you are draw them to Christ, not just what you said? I'll give you one more illustration, and then I'll say goodbye. We were at Steak. Remember Steak and Ale? I loved Steak and Ale. We used to eat there a lot. That was the big place back then. It wasn't really all that expensive nor that big, but to get a good steak at Steak and Ale was always a blessing. And so we were in a pastor's meeting, and we had a table full of pastors. I think there were about 8 pastors at my table. And the waiter came over to take our order, the young man, and he said, can I take your order? And the preacher at the end of the table said, well, what's your name? He said, Joseph or Jacob or whatever it was. We're talking 40 years ago. And he said, Well, Jacob, have you, if you died tonight, do you have the assurance in your heart you'd go to heaven? And Jacob said, no, sir, I need to get your drink order. What did you want to drink? Well, Jacob, don't you think it's important to know that if you died tonight, you would go to heaven? Well, yes, sir, I'm sure that's important. But I'm trying to do my job here. Can you tell me what you would like to drink? And the pastor humiliated the young man with the gospel. And when the young man finished getting the drink orders and left, I looked over to the pastor that had done that, and I said, you should be ashamed. And he was shocked. He said, what do you mean? And I said, you just humiliated him. You embarrassed him in front of all of us. And you think for some reason he's going to accept your gospel presentation? That's not the way to bring someone into the kingdom. Let's learn how to do that. And let's make sure, first of all, that our lives are in order and that our wagons are filled. What's in your wagon? I'll talk to you in days and weeks to come. God bless you. Have a good weekend and Merry Christmas. Oh, well, one more thing. I have a gift for you. If you will email me and ask me for it, I'll give you the email in just a moment. I'll send it to you. I think my title was 100 Misconceptions About Christmas. It's a special report that I put together, and it may not be 100. It may be 89 or 110. I'm not sure. But it's almost complete. And so email me at U.S. Prayer Center, U.S. like United States, U.S. Prayer Center. In fact, I'll post it under this video. U.S. Prayer Center at cs.com. CS stands for CompuServe. I'm old school. And so it's U.S. Prayer Center at cs.com. And just email the word report, and I'll return it to you by email. God bless you, and have a great weekend, and Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.